If you want to jump back. Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. Very excited to have you all joining us this evening for another of our Tech Impact Forum spring series of speakers that we've been bringing together. It's really exciting collaboration between Ollie, One Berkshire, and the Berkshire Innovation Center. Many of you know me. My name is Ben Lamb. I'm the Director of Economic Development at One Berkshire and a proud member of the Tech Impact Forum. I get the honor this evening of welcoming our illustrious guests that are going to be speaking with us tonight and participating in a Q&A as we learn a bit more about the rural economy and closing the economic gap through digital technology. So I'm going to just quickly introduce both of our folks that we have joining us tonight. First off, I'd like to welcome Representative Tricia Farley-Bouvier. She will be our Q&A facilitator for this evening's event. Representative Tricia Farley-Bouvier is the state representative for the 3rd Berkshire District, which includes a majority of Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Elected to the House in a special election in October of 2011, she began serving as a state rep a mere 3 weeks later. Born and raised in Pittsfield, Representative Farley-Bouvier attended Pittsfield High School and went on to receive her bachelor's degree in special and elementary education from Salve Regina University and her master's degree in education from the University of Connecticut. Now serving in her 10th year in the House of Representatives, Representative Farley-Bouvier works to champion the needs of her fellow Pittsfield and Berkshire County residents, including the need for improved broadband access in our rural communities for everything from educating our youth to creating new pathways of industry. So I'd like to welcome Representative Farley-Bouvier to this evening. Next up, and the reason that we're all probably here this evening, I'd like to welcome our speaker for this evening. Matt Dunne is the founder and executive director at the Center on Rural Innovation, a nonprofit action tank helping communities plan and build broadband networks that will ensure that they can participate in and benefit from the economies of the future. Matt served 11 years in the Vermont House and Senate, enacting the state's first broadband grants, brownfields revitalization funding, and downtown redevelopment program. In 1999, Matt was appointed director of AmeriCorps Vista under President Clinton, where he led Power Up, one of the first national efforts to bridge the digital divide, and launched an Entrepreneur Corps to focus on microfinance and high-need communities. In 2007, he started Google's Community Affairs Division out of the former bread factory in White River Junction, Vermont, where he led all local US philanthropy and engagement, including the Google Fiber rollout and orchestrating educational and development initiatives in Google's data center communities across rural America. Matt has a BA from Brown University and also held an appointment at the MIT Media Lab. He is a lifelong Vermonter who lives on the 100-acre farm where he was raised. And with that, I would like to officially welcome him to share with us about the digital economy in rural America and closing the opportunity gap. So take it away, Matt.
Great. Thank you, Ben, and thank you for having me once again. It's great to be with you all. I'm going to try sharing my presentation if I can do that. Whenever you have innovation in the title of your talk, you know that the audiovisual is not going to work. All right, works? Good? Everyone can see? Excellent. Well, I am again delighted to be here. I'm coming to you from where we are headquartered, which is Berkshire's north, sometimes known as Vermont, and we are delighted to feel that kindred spirit all the way down I-91. And what I'm going to do is take a little bit of time to talk about where the rural economy is today and how digital economies can solve for it. We are an organization that focuses on digital economy ecosystems. We have some models and we have some places that we're actually doing work in different parts of the country. And so I'm going to use those as ways of grounding this and creating examples, and then look forward to a good question and answer period and conversation with the representative. So the Center on Rural Innovation is an action tank that focuses on advancing inclusive rural prosperity through digital economy ecosystems that support scalable entrepreneurship and tech job creation. And the reason that we created this organization in 2017 was because of this chart, which is that the United States is facing the largest opportunity gap between urban and rural places in 100 years. And this all came about in the disequal recovery from the 2008 recession, where everyone fell, rural places fell further, but urban communities came roaring right back and exceeding their pre-recession levels fairly quickly, while rural places, even by January of 2020, hadn't gotten back to their pre-recession levels. COVID hit and it impacted everyone, but for cities, it meant going back to basically where they were before the Great Recession. But for rural places, it meant hitting new economic lows. And this is a serious problem on a variety of levels, not only on an equity basis, but it also leads to divisions in our country in a lot of pronounced ways, and needs to be addressed quickly because it becomes harder and harder to close this gap every year that goes by. But the big question is then, how did this happen at this particular period, this particular moment? And there's three main drivers for the rural opportunity gap. The first was automation that came on like a tidal wave in the earliest part of this century and accelerated during the recession as companies were trying to find cheaper ways to produce goods and services. The second was globalization that also accelerated during the recession. And it came about both from policy that was passed, but also because of technology that allowed for supply chains to be connected electronically, where you no longer had to be in a quick drive from a city center to a lower cost labor market in rural America, but you could actually collaborate with a manufacturing plant on the other side of the globe. And the third reason was the steep decline of entrepreneurship, which had happened for the 30 years prior to the 2008 recession. And what that meant when the recession hit was that there wasn't the farm team of companies to come in behind the ones that went away when that economic shock hit us. And these things combined had a profound impact on our nation's economy, because during this period, as many may remember, was a time of some of the greatest economic expansion nationwide in our history, led by companies less than 10 years of age. And all were based on the fruits of automation and globalization, namely digital economy jobs, computer science, IT, and related fields. Unfortunately, those jobs were almost exclusively created in urban places, and the jobs that were removed because of automation were almost exclusively removed in rural, causing this divide. And you can see in the chart of where the jobs in the innovation sector were created that it was really concentrated in those few cities around the country. And even when you look at an individual state, like Vermont, for example, you found that the few digital jobs that were being created were in their metro centers, even if they were comparatively small. So, for example, Burlington, and it left the rest of the country behind. And so our North Star as an organization is to address this particular gap, which is that 15% of the nation's workforce is in rural America, but only 5% of the digital economy jobs. And we believe that if you're going to get to a place of economic equity, you need to bring that 5% of digital economy jobs in rural places up to 15%. And that's important because the jobs that we're talking about present the easiest way for economic advancement, including from people of different educational backgrounds. And the other is that they're going to be the most resilient jobs moving forward as automation continues to accelerate. And in fact, the pandemic has only made it go faster. One of the examples we use up our way is that the ski areas all opened in Vermont. It's just that they didn't have people who sold tickets at the windows. And people have actually gotten really used to buying their tickets online and kind of like it. And the likelihood of those jobs coming back in the numbers that they were before is just really small. We're seeing it across the board that automation is going to come as a major force in whatever recovery we have, but that makes it all the more important that there is ownership of production across the country in the age of automation. So there are some positive parts to the pandemic. There are not a lot, but one of them is that people are rethinking where they live and where they have to live. And as we all know, if given the choice, many people would much rather live in a smaller community that has a sense of community, where you don't have to be in snarling traffic all the time, where your cost of living is smaller, where you can know people and find that connectivity that people are really hungry for and have lost in many of the big cities. And we're seeing that happen. We're seeing folks who are moving to more rural places. Many of them are bringing their jobs with them. And the largest group of those that are making that shift are independent technologists. And it's not surprising because they should be the ones who are able to do it if they have broadband. It's a very big if, but if they have broadband, they can move to those places, take their jobs with them, and really change that dynamic. But we've got to be intentional about seizing this moment to make sure that it's more than just a Zoom city where people are moving there and just staying isolated, but that they actually become part of a community and create more opportunity for people that were already there and start to generate the kinds of businesses that create wealth. So these are the kinds of jobs that we're talking about in case people are uncertain. They're software engineering jobs, web development, data science, IT specialists are some of the more entry-level jobs, but they pay very well. And these are really skill sets that can be transferable. So if one particular company or industry goes away, there is lots of opportunity for people to move to similar jobs in other companies, and they're necessary across the board. So they're certainly necessary for tech companies, very intensely, but banks and hospitals and others need these kinds of jobs also. And actually, one of the painful parts is that frequently in rural places, they assume there can't be technologists nearby, so they outsource those jobs to Brooklyn and San Francisco at a premium. And so it's important to make sure you're focused on these jobs, both for the existing demand that's there and connect them to those employers, as well as building out beyond that. So in order to be able to do this, you have to work with communities. You can't do digital economies to communities. And I'm sure you all understand that. And a successful digital economy is going to be rooted in a community's values and assets. And that's what's going to make it authentic and interesting and much more effective over the long term. So the way that we approach this is by doing capacity building. Working with communities to develop assessments of where they are, strategies that incorporate their core competencies, and then help them to be able to secure the funding from federal sources, of which there are many dollars that are out there ready to support this kind of work, as well as local sources that can augment that and make this happen and be sustainable. We then get them through having an actionable plan. We then invite them into the Rural Innovation Network, which is now across all 4 time zones, 20 different communities, where they become a part of a community of practice that can share their work and the best practices that they have in a particular area to transfer it elsewhere. And then it also allows us to be able to share data and insights across the board, so that those communities can understand their own work and their economies in context. You can also help them connect to other kinds of resources. So far, our work, we've only been at this 3 years, but we've been able to help communities to raise more than $10 million in federal and matching funds to be able to execute against that. And we also had this year five communities launch accelerators that had never done it before, which was super exciting. So when we're talking about this work, I've mentioned a few times that you have to build an ecosystem, and that's got to include a bunch of different things all at once. Unfortunately, that we've seen when you just do digital skills training or coding boot camps or that kind of thing by themselves, rural folks from all kinds of education backgrounds take to it really, really well, and they promptly move. And that doesn't get us anywhere, right? It actually accelerates some of the exodus that we're not wanting to see. And so you have to do the support of entrepreneurship at the same time and be connecting people to jobs that aren't requiring them to move. And as someone who, convinced Google that I could do a job for them from White River Junction, Vermont, we know it is possible, but it is something that you need to be intentional about, working with co-work spaces and other kinds of things to make that happen. And at the center of it is still higher education. It is an anchor in a variety of ways, whether it's talent flow from the students, faculty spouses, as well as having an anchor institution to help do this in the first phase. We think all rural places will be able to do this, but in the first phase, higher education institutions are critical. So this is how we think about it on a more programmatic level. On the left-hand side, these are what we call the foundational elements, and they're all the things that a healthy rural economy needs to be working on to create vibrancy and a positive economy, and none of them are things that we get involved in. And that's because it's not because they're not important, they're core, but other people are better at it than we are. And it is just important, though, to acknowledge them, that the work that we do is a piece to the puzzle, but all these other things matter. Then in the center section is the infrastructure that's necessary to be able to allow a digital economy ecosystem to thrive. So front and center is broadband. It is the electricity of our time. It is absolutely critical. It's become, people have become aware that it's even more critical because of the pandemic. And in fact, in the stimulus bill that President Biden just signed, there is a lot of money for broadband. And it is something to keep an eye on if that continues to be a challenge in your area, because it is capital that is going to be coming directly to states, specifically to allow for broadband and potentially co-working and entrepreneurship spaces, which is our next subject. So you've got your broadband, but you also need places and spaces to have people come together and to create a focus. Density in rural places actually do matter, and you can have it in a rural place. You just need to be more intentional about it than you have to in New York City, where it's dense by design. And so co-working spaces are important. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And then local leadership capacity is also a critical piece. And we see this as infrastructure. That's making sure you have the folks on the ground that are going to be on the board, that understand of an organization, that understand the dynamics, that are willing to come together collaboratively to build this kind of economic base. Because it can't be just one person trying to stand this up on their own. It takes incredible collaboration to make it happen. So that's the infrastructure piece. And then there comes the programmatic elements that we believe are necessary for a digital economy ecosystem to thrive. You need to have the digital workforce training programs. So coding and IT and data science training, more and more of which is online and very, very effective. You find it at community colleges as well, but there are lots of options nationally that have become effective, bringing in people from all stages of their educational trajectory to be able to be a part of that segment. And then there's the access to the digital economy jobs, as I mentioned, both remote as well as connecting to existing local employers. There's the supporting of scalable tech entrepreneurship, and that is accelerator programs, creating mentor networks, and the like. And then there is access to capital, which is actually going to be willing to invest in those kinds of early stage startups, which is not always common in rural places. There's frequently capital and investors, but this has been a new dynamic. In actually in the Berkshires, there's a Northampton area, and in the Berkshires there is actually an angel network that's fairly active, which is great. But you want to make sure that there's access to capital at all of those stages. And then the final piece is on inclusive tech culture building, and that means doing the startup weekends and the meetups and the things that make people who are in the tech space know that there are other folks who are like them and care about the same things. But it's also important to do it in an inclusive way, because Silicon Valley and Kendall Square and other places just botched that at the outset and are now spending so much time, energy, and money trying to show that no, they really do want to include BIPOC communities as well as women. If we do this right from the outset, we think it can be inclusive by design. And so these are all elements that we think have to come together. Oh, and on the inclusive side, it's the right thing to do for a variety of reasons, but also if you're doing this work in a rural place, you need everyone involved, because that's going to be your biggest constraint is the talent that's there. And so you want everyone to be brought to the table. And if you do this right, you then have local wealth creation from the startups as well as the quality jobs, and they work in synergy so that the people who are in those jobs could become the entrepreneurs as they figure out a new way to solve a particular problem using technology. This is how we look at it in a more, at least to me, pictorial way and relatable way. And it's creating that kind of density of loft and living spaces in a downtown building that could also have in it the incubator and accelerator and co-work space, and then have in that same area the digital jobs training and connecting people to jobs both locally and remotely. And that's important so that people can see aspirationally where they can go. If you do it completely in isolation and don't see other people who are in those kinds of jobs working day to day, it sometimes feels abstract. But if you're right there in the middle of it, it helps with mentorship and community and keeping people focused on the potential of where they can go. There are some foundation pieces, higher education, as I mentioned, is super important. Broadband, super important. You got to have the capital. And then there's the amenities that actually creates the connections and draws people together. And we sometimes joke that the real core to rural economic development are the 3 Bs, which are broadband, blues, and beer. And if you have those 3, you will actually, do pretty well. Frankly. And we also have a taco truck here, and we use that to emphasize 2 things. One is that taco trucks are great. We all love them, and they are great for this kind of an ecosystem that you want to build. But the types of companies that we focus on accelerating are not taco trucks. They're not local market companies. Lots of folks do that and do that really, really well. And a tech company is not a taco truck with a website. However, a taco truck owner who builds a website and realizes that they could turn that into a platform to provide a website and app for all taco trucks in the country, that's a scalable tech company. And we use that just to make sure everyone's clear what it is we think needs to be created in rural places to be successful economically in the long term, but also to recognize that people can come to that if they, have a fancy degree from MIT, or they've just figured out how to do technology in their small business and want to take that and scale it. So this is a little bit more about the kinds of entities on the infrastructure side. And this is about the direct drivers that we already talked about. These are the kinds of organizations and companies that we've been fortunate to commit to working with us and supporting us in a variety of ways. It's public, private, individuals, partners. It's just been an incredible few years of getting this rolling. This is our network of communities, which again is all across the country. They represent every type of rural place with with different origin stories economically, as well as demographics, temperature, and they're just an incredible group of individual change agents that really love sharing their best practices and allow us to be able to work across them. And when we work with the communities, we help provide the best practices that we're seeing from across the country and help them on their journey to stand up accelerators. We also provide resources. We have a seed fund where we invest in early stage tech companies that are coming out of these programs. And we partner with digital skilling partners at scale to be able to provide those kinds of services and opportunities to students across the board, as well as some other things that we can access centrally and then deliver locally. And we create platforms for ongoing learning and development. As an organization, we do mapping and data visualization. I just highlight that because so much of the work that happens in rural places on doing economic development is without those kinds of tools that big cities have. And so we're trying to democratize that kind of data and tools. This is one of them, which is the tech tracker tool that allows you to look at your own community and be able to understand the tech talent in your region. And you can look at it from a variety of different ways. You can compare it to other peer communities of similar size, and we find this super helpful to know where a community is starting and where they're going. This is some of the investments that we've made in companies that are, great. It turns out there's a lot of tech companies in rural places if you actually go out there and look at them, look for them. And these are companies that any seed fund would want to have in their portfolio. So I'm going to spend just the last bit of time on just looking at some of the communities that we've been working with. They include Traverse City, Michigan, which is an interesting community up in the northern part of the Mitt in Michigan. It has traditionally been a tourist community, but they wanted to help create a middle class because the jobs up there were low paying, and then they had the tourists. And so they created a co-work space that turned into an innovation hub, and they're now launching an accelerator, and they've already been able to get a number of startups through their program and scaling with a focus, interestingly, on tech in healthcare. Cape Girardeau, Missouri, which is in the upper part of the Mississippi Delta, was started by two people from Cape Girardeau that felt there could be a digital economy. They were setting up their own software project shop because they were getting lots of inbound, and so they wanted to start training people to start working with them. So they started up a training program. They then created a co-work space, and then they started doing an accelerator program and investing in companies. And they have just been doing fantastic work. And they've also gone to the elementary schools and started an unbelievable coding league that they claim is more popular than basketball there, which is quite a feat, but across middle schools all in that region. Marquette, Michigan is another one that's on the Upper Peninsula, all the way up on Lake Superior. They're leveraging Northern Michigan University and a cybersecurity concentration that they've had up there to build out a nascent digital economy and looking to allow the students coming out of there not to move as quickly as they can to Ann Arbor or Chicago, but to actually stay there and build companies. And they have an angel network, and they're just now putting together their strategy and application for funding so they can get this really rolling over the next 3 years. And then Springfield, Vermont, which is just up the road. This is our first community that we worked with. Springfield, that is just stunning and had the highest per capita income in Vermont for 40 years until it didn't when Machine Tool left. And they have been running their first accelerator, even in the pandemic. They're doing digital skills training with a couple of different platforms. And they've already had 2 companies relocate from the Hanover, or from the Dartmouth area, to Springfield to be part of that ecosystem. And we, the Corey Innovation Fund, invested in both of those startups, which are really exciting. North Iowa is a new one that is doing great. One thing that you'll note in all of these is that they all had solved the broadband issue. And so they were already working with, gigabit speed internet because they had built fiber to the home. And it's a really great set of examples of places that can just go and do it. There's some wonderful examples in your region as well, and some real progress being made. But that is a core nature of it, and it's why we actually got into the broadband support work as well. And so we're working with communities across Vermont, New Hampshire, Maryland, Arkansas, and a big project in Tennessee, where we've been working with communities that are in rural Tennessee, trying to get fiber to the home, leveraging their electric co-ops and other kinds of things. And it's just been a really exciting project, starting with 5 counties. And it looks like we're going to start to work with an additional 40 over the next year, help them plan it out, get real plans that have business plans that can be executed, and make sure that they've got the resources coming in to make that sustainable. These are examples of other startups other than the ones that we have in our in the portfolio that are happening in these communities, in case people say, well, can they really do tech companies in rural? The answer is absolutely. And what I love about it is the wide variety, everything from companies using AI to solve, to provide suicide prevention tools to institutions, all the way to a space propulsion company that is going to be sending, some of their products in the next rover to the moon. So it's just a wonderful example, and we think it's important in changing the narrative about the potential for rural, which we really do believe can be a part of the innovation revolution, but it won't happen by accident. You have to be proactive, you have to have the infrastructure, and then really come together as a community to build that programming to make it real. So that's my presentation. And I haven't been reading the chats as they've been going along.
That's okay, Matt. That's our job to do that for you. So Ben and I are tag teaming on that. So Matt, I can't thank you enough. I think that you just have a perspective, that's broader, and, we think about what's happening right here in our own community, and to be able to have that perspective, and you've seen how it works and doesn't work in all different kinds of places. So just for fun, I'm going to, learned a few things about you today, Matt. So we have a few things in common. Not only do we have the state legislature in common, but also I was a Jesuit volunteer, which is obviously really similar to the AmeriCorps. So we have that in common too. So I wish I could say my background was as techie as yours, and I was, could say I was as smart as you. That would probably do better for the state legislature. But I love talking about my hometown. Okay. And one of the things I'm really excited about for Pittsfield is that we have started in the beginning steps to, plan out having our own fiber network in Pittsfield, because, well, I have to tell you, the motivation is that everybody wants to just, kick Charter Spectrum, right out. I mean, I'm going to use only polite language right now, but we are really, really angry at them. They just keep raising their prices, and their service isn't any better. And so we've really started exploring having our own fiber network just down the road. an hour from here, in Westfield. They have a terrific example of it, but they built it out of their own municipal electric plant, and then they expanded. We don't have a municipal electric plant to build from, but I guess I'd love to hear just if you could say one or two things about what works and what doesn't work about that. Like whatever you do, stay away from, something like that.
Sure.
And then there's lots of questions in the chat, so we'll get to those too.
So the exciting thing right now is that rural places came to the same conclusion that you did, right? We're tired of waiting. We can't wait anymore. This is too critical, and used, sort of their own grit and ingenuity to just try things. And so there are some really great examples of success. The one that I would highlight, particularly for a community of yours size, that doesn't have a municipal electric company or a cooperative electric company, I assume as well, because those are the easiest. They own the poles already, and in fact, they can justify doing fiber drops because they will reduce ratepayer costs on electricity by making it more efficient to do meter reading and things like that. And then that pays for part of it, and they can do the rest. But what's been emerging are things called telecommunication union districts. And these are entities that are public in nature. They are frequently collaborations of many municipalities, and they're structured similar to fire districts. Right, so you can cross over county lines or municipal lines, but still have bonding authority for revenue bonds. And it also allows for a little more participatory connection and community basis in it. So you're not at the whims of investment decisions or rate jacking decisions by a big corporate office far, far away. And so Vermont has done a number of those. Kansas actually pioneered a variety of those kinds of structures, and they're really effective. And what they also allow for is leveraging dollars that are public in the near term as they get set up. And then you can, once you have a couple of years of revenue, you can then go and get a revenue bonds on the market to finance your build out. And it can actually be accelerated if you know someone in state government, perhaps, and there might be a bond bank or something that could help backstop some of those. It makes it much easier to be able to build that capital, because it's not cheap, but it's not like you have to pay for it, all at once. This is a 20, 30, 40 year kind of an effort. I would say that it is usually important to get a critical mass of people into a mix, and it's the right thing to do, right? If you have a more concentrated center, including those other communities, it does work, and you can bring it together. And that's despite Washington, Massachusetts managing to put together their own fiber network with like 14 people or whatever it was. I mean,
they're amazing.
I don't know how they did that, but that's not the norm. And sometimes smaller ones struggle when they don't have their own PhD engineers running the whole thing. But that's what I would do. The other thing that I would just be really careful is anyone tries to pitch you on wireless solutions, just they're not going to hold up to the needs. They might serve, it might be better than what you got right now, but it is going to be obsolete soon. And in fact, Starlink, which is Elon Musk's new thing, is providing a satellite solution, which also is going to be okay for the immediate term. It turns off, when the Earth turns periodically, but they'll figure that out. But it's also going to get too slow in the upload in the next 5 years. And so you really want the future-proof fiber to the home, make that investment. And if you amortize it over a long time, it's actually much more cost-effective as well. We're
And
happy to chat.
I'll frame this to say that, I represent Pittsfield, which is the big city
Right.
around here,
Right.
right? And so, as a matter of fact, when Ben asked me to do this, I said, "You want me to be the person doing the rural, right?" And then he explained why it was such a good idea for me to do this. And of course, I'm happy to always be in a position to learn new things and to get things, Pittsfield set up for success. But and so you're making a really good point that if Pittsfield is a bit of a center and has a critical mass, that we should really be including the other towns. Now, of course, a lot of these towns, as you said before, have really taken some leaps forward with their last mile. So there's a couple of questions about that that I'm going to try to kind of combine. Like the first one about this is about that there's been some real impediments to last mile work. So, we had the build out, broadband 1, 2, 3, and the idea was to build the middle mile, and then and it was going to be no problem. The last mile's going to be taken care of, and of course, that's been a long time ago that happened. So, what do you see as the main impediments to last mile?
So there's a few different things that are impediments to last mile. One is you got to have a willing, ISP, right? Willing provider, which we were talking about before. They've got to really want to go and do it because it does cost money and it takes time. And if they're already providing mediocre service, their incentive to go and do something else isn't that high because that costs money and they're already making bank off of the crummy service they might be providing. And in fact, oddly, the best models are communities that have really terrible service, like only have DSL, because the take rate is much higher. Right? And so the business plan, even in a smaller market, works better if it's really, really bad. So you need to do that kind of math. The other big issue is pole attachment rights. And I'm going to get really, really geeky on this, but to put it simply, if someone owns the poles who you would be competing with, if you put up another service, they sometimes take a long time to approve, if ever, that you can actually attach to that pole. And in rural places, it's mostly aerial. It's not usually underground. Some communities have put underground conduit or have requirements in that. And that sometimes make it a different story. But there are rules that can be made, there are laws that can be passed that allow for speedy pole attachments, less expensive pole attachments. So you can't charge unbelievable fees for the right to put it up, especially they're in right of ways. So there is the ability to regulate those kinds of things. And the other is something called One Touch Make Ready, which allows for someone who's trying to come and build to the home project to not have to wait for 4 different contractors to come to move things around and put things up, which just multiply the cost dramatically. So and there's legislation, model legislation in some states, even Georgia passed a law that allowed for much faster pole attachment, and they were stringing up fiber literally within 2 weeks to the home. So those are the kinds of things. And then at the end of the day, it's just capital, right? It does cost a bit to get to the last mile. It does pay for itself over time. And I will, again, the stimulus bill is likely to deliver hundreds of millions of dollars to the state of Massachusetts, specifically for broadband, as we interpret it. And that's the moment to just get it done.
That's right. That's right. And so another question about that last mile is, that really at this point, every town has some level of infrastructure for broadband. And so the question is, what should the next step be for tech in the Berkshires as a large rural area?
The next step for tech or for broadband, or just getting the...
It says the question should be for tech in the Berkshires as a large rural area.
So one thing that I would say is that getting fiber to the home is important because if you're wanting to recruit people who are passionate about technology, they don't like doing it just at work or at the co-work space. They like doing it home at 1 a.m. And so one of the things that we learned with Google Fiber was that was critically, it was fiber to the home, not fiber to the big office building.
Downtown,
that really made a difference. And I think in this moment when people were rethinking whether they want to live in massive cities and with all the costs and other things associated with it, being a step forward is a big deal. And so having that kind of infrastructure there. The next part is making sure that you're investing in the kinds of tech ecosystem pieces that can allow people to aggregate, because there are techies up in the hills everywhere, right? They're out there, but they don't necessarily know about each other. And so having places where you can have tech meetups, where you can have a symposia about Python, where you can do a hackathon thing, sometimes gets people out and connected to one another in fun ways. And as a non-technologist, right, you don't want me writing code. It's also fun to go and see and hear about innovations that are coming up as they go along. From there, doing accelerators and those and working with angel networks to do pitch competitions that open to, everyone loves Shark Tank. You can do those kinds of things on a different level. And that just creates that energy. But again, I would also say that in rural places, it's important to do that in a regional way, right? It's not one town versus another town for pitch competition. It's each town has 2,500 people, right? That doesn't make sense.
Right.
You can actually share in that in some really lovely ways.
Cool. Well, here's a specific question for you. This person says he lives in Washington State. And so does Corey work in Washington? And what, if any issues does a large area state face compared to a small state?
So we are not in Washington State, and I'm glad people are dialing in from this. And I'm impressed with your reach. Well done. So we are in Oregon, which may make you less happy. I don't know. But we work with a great community in Independence, Oregon, and we're just starting work in the Dalles, Oregon, which is right on the Hood River and on the Columbia River, and it's just beautiful. And we would love to be in rural Washington as well, because we do think there's a lot of opportunity there, especially as people are reconsidering their lives in Seattle, and there's beautiful parts. What we find actually is that it's not that different even with the size of state. The dynamic between the big city and the rural places in a small geography state seems to be the same. It's just at a different scale in larger states. And we've seen that the economic distress has also been consistent. That rural places across the board have been struggling, whether or not they're in a state that's the size of a county in another state, or if they're in a big state. So we haven't seen that much difference. It does, when you get to really, really rural places, where there is, a village of 250 people and then nothing for 40 miles. That's a step function of complexity, both getting broadband there, as you can imagine, but also in creating enough density to create at least phase one of digital economy ecosystems. But if there's a university campus or a four-year endowed college within a 40-mile drive time, you can usually draft off of that, including, liberal arts colleges. We're going to work in Waterville, Maine, and Colby, which is, a four-year liberal arts college, is fully engaged, and their students are fired up, and their faculty are like, thank God we're getting to do some stuff with the things that we're designing. So that we see is going to be important in this first wave.
Okay, that's great. The next question is about COVID relief funds. So of course, there's been these different phases of the COVID relief funds, including the one the president signed today. And this is, do any COVID relief funds target specifically supporting co-working spaces or helping sustain them during a time they may be financially challenged? So I don't know if you have specific information about that, Matt.
I actually have some specific, and I am not going to claim that I can read the tea leaves of what the Treasury is going to actually put out. You know how dangerous that is. However, there is, and I'm going to try to pull it up while we're talking, which is always dangerous.
But well, while you're doing that, I'll just lay a little bit of foundation work to give you a second to look that up, just to know that in Massachusetts, there have been ongoing, I would say, for at least the last 5 or 6 years of really investing in co-working space through mass development and the Office of Economic Development and Housing. So I think it's a really good point. And, you know, again, places like the Berkshires co-working spaces can just be perfect for all the things like, yes, we're moving out of the big cities, and the Berkshires is the perfect place to do that, by the way, especially if we get our broadband and our networks going. But for the meetups that you're talking about, right, Matt, and, you know, to be able to have people with great ideas, you know, coming together. So.
No, and you shouldn't expect rural co-work spaces to be profitable, right? That's one thing that I tell people. I mean, it should have revenue. It can be self-sustaining, but they're community centers. They're the laboratories of humans, right? To be able to have ideas and to be able to do things. And a number of states have followed Massachusetts' lead in actually making that kind of investment in what's sort of the new community center, right? Or in some ways, it's the new industrial park. It's just the industrial park of talent, and the food's usually better. But it's a different. So I can't paste something this size in there. But the one that I would keep an eye out for is in the appropriation, which is the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund, which is going to be $10 billion going directly to states to do. To support capital projects that directly enable work, education, and health monitoring, including remote options in response to the public health emergency with respect to the coronavirus disease. So the interpretation that we understand from folks both in the Senate and in the White House is that obviously it speaks to broadband, but it's also about the ways and means to be able to do those kinds of things. So we think co-work spaces would fit in there. We think telehealth initiatives would fit in there. And because it's capital projects, it's not for programming. So we think that co-work spaces would be an ideal use of those kinds of dollars, which will be flowing, at least Secretary Yellen has said, very, very soon.
Yes. And, you know, this is when we revel in the fact that the Ways and Means chairman of the House is our congressman, right? So could be helpful. And hoping that West-East Rail could be considered part of the response to the pandemic, right? So next question, how do we address equity issues as it pertains to access to broadband at the inceptions of any plans, which is something that you alluded to when building, you know, the ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think there's access to broadband, so we can talk about that, which is you want to make sure that you're not allowing for cherry picking, right? Look, redlining can happen intentionally, and it can also happen unintentionally. And I actually witnessed, Google do something where they were trying to measure demand. So what they wanted to do is say, all right, the communities that pre-sign up at a higher percentage first will go to first. Right. And it was to get people energized and say, yes, we want it, and to show take rate and all of that stuff. And lo and behold, in the communities that we went into, the white neighborhoods signed up first because they had more, financial capacity. They were more aware of the pieces. There was literally these dividing lines were across the railroad tracks. And I was like, folks, this is not good, right? That's no, bad. And it took a little while for engineers, who were like, but the numbers show this is where. So you want to be thoughtful about the fact that it should deploy in a rational way across the board. It should do so quickly, and it should be done in a thoughtful way. The other part that we haven't talked about is when you get beyond at least having the option of decent broadband, is the fact that, for some people, $75 a month is a lot of money. And what we saw, really front and center in cities that had decent broadband was that people were left out of remote learning. at a significant level. And there were a number of initiatives to try to address that. But as it becomes more and more just like the necessity for economic opportunity, for learning, and for equitable health access, we need to be thinking about how do we make sure that it's affordable to people of all means and backgrounds.
That's great. I agree. We certainly saw the issues around remote learning, just like really is terrible, you know, really terrible. And we were just trying to piece it together bits by bits. Let's run around and like, oh, the school system can now afford 200 hotspots. Let's go and see if we can get them to, it's like, anyway, sorry.
No, I'm with you.
This is back to the Berkshires here, you know, pointing out that the Berkshires are really this collection of small fragmented communities. And how would you engage town managers to embrace the economic development that they don't feel like they have the resources for? Like, how would you pitch this to town managers?
Yeah, I mean, I really think that this is something that makes sense on a regional approach. And I actually don't know if there is a economic development organization recognized by the EDA in your region.
Yeah, Ben Lamb works for them. So
that's so because sometimes there's regional economic sometimes there are regional economic development organizations like in southern Vermont that aren't actually the EDD, but you know, that's what those entities were really structured to do, was to work across those kinds, you know, communities and town managers. That doesn't make it easy, as Ben will tell you, to get alignment on these things. Broadband tends to be a good starting point because I think most town managers, you know, come to the realization that doing it completely solo would be really hard. And if you're creating a network where everyone benefits from coming together in something like a communication district, which is, you know, contractual, right? So everyone knows what's happening, how these things are going to work, who's, you know, contributing or not contributing. In the case of the ones in Vermont, there was a commitment that the communities didn't have to use bonded dollars, you know, unless they wanted to accelerate the work in their area. That's the other piece, is that I don't know the status of legislation in Massachusetts, but New Hampshire just passed a law allowing for municipalities to bond for money to build out broadband. And they are seeing, you know, ISPs use that right away to be able to build out capacity. But that's how I would, you know, come at it. And then it's just trying to get to a place where you're authentically saying we want to do this across the board, and we can find that kind of energy. We can find, you know, locations where it makes sense to be able to come together and support, you know, co-work spaces and the like. And then you just want to make sure that it's clear how that mutually benefits people across the board. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's doable.
Right. And, you know, my job was to stop about 5 minutes ago and say, last question, and then ask the last question. So people would have an idea we were coming to the end. And I'm just looking at this time and I'm like, oh, my job was to be the timekeeper. So I think this discussion was just so engaging that it was easy for this time to fly by. I'm just say quickly that I did see a question in the chat about the legislature, and are we taking a look at those poll considerations and what do we need to do to pave the way? And my commitment is that we'll be looking at them, and, you know, maybe Ben and Adam Himes and I can sit down and really look at what we need to do to be able to do that. But with that, Matt, I just can't thank you enough, not only for your ongoing work on this, but that to bring the knowledge that you have, the advice that you have to our community. I think everybody here has really learned a lot. And, you know, it's one of these talks after a talk like this, you just kind of get psyched up, right? To take the next steps and what is our future going to look like, and to be able to kind of own our own future. That's how I feel about this. that, you know, we're the determiners of our destiny. And I think we can do that. So again, I thank you so much. I thank you, One Berkshire, and for Ollie. They're always such great partners in bringing good information to people and generating good discussion. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ben.
Thank you very much, Representative Farley-Bouvier, and thank you, Matt. Thank you both. This was a fantastic conversation. I took just as much from the conversation back and forth as I took from the presentation, which is not always the case with speakers. So this was really great. And we had a number of questions that came through on the end there. So clearly you're getting people all pumped up and excited and wanting to get those answers to their questions in the future. So I think we'll work as the Tech Impact Forum to continue to try to address those. And I love the idea of working with you, Representative, to think more critically about the poll work that's necessary down the pike here. So again, thank you, Matt, for taking the time. Thank you to your team for working with us to pull this together, as well as you, Representative Farley-Bouvier. My last piece that I wanted to just not forget to mention is this is an ongoing series. And so we are really excited to soon, it'll be going live. We will have our next one of this Tech Impact Forum series on April 6th. And it's going to be Haig, and I apologize for mispronouncing the last name, Nailbantian, who is the founder of the Workforce Sciences Institute, who will be having a conversation with Danielle Gonzalez, who's the Director of Human Resources at Williams College, and also happens to be our board president at One Berkshire. So they're going to be having a conversation on big data's impact on workforce success and equity. And we had a little bit of a primer for it earlier today. It's a really exciting topic and something that I think a lot of people across the field and across the board can take something away from. So we hope to see many, if not all of you there for that one. But it is, you know, we've reached the hour here. So one last thank you to Ollie, the Tech Impact Forum, our partners at Berkshire Innovation Center, and of course, our illustrious speakers this evening, Representative Tricia Farley-Bouvier and Matt Dunne. So thank you all and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you all. It was a really nice evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.